Okay, before we even start, I'm going to ask you to do something.
Oh, go.
It might feel a little weird, but just go with me on this.
I'm listening.
I want you to take everything you think you know about Islam.
Uh-huh.
I mean, everything. The rituals, the mosques, the news headlines, the 5 pillars, all of it. Just sort of picture it all in your head.
Right, the whole cultural package that we've absorbed over the years.
Exactly, the whole package. Now, I want you to mentally take that entire stack, put it in a big, heavy iron box,
Okay.
lock it, and just shove it into the deepest corner of your mental attic.
So we're starting completely fresh, a clean slate.
We have to. We absolutely have to, because the stack of documents we're deep diving into today, well, honestly, it refuses to coexist with any of those current definitions.
It really does.
If you try to read these memos through the lens of what we call standard religion, they just won't make sense. They'll sound contradictory.
Like trying to run Windows software on a Mac. The operating systems are incompatible.
Exactly. But if we read them on their own terms, if we clear the slate, then we are looking at something that feels less like a theology and more like a manifesto.
Manifesto is the perfect word. That's what it feels like.
A manifesto for a completely different species of civilization.
It is.
Well-
And what we're looking at, just for context, is a pretty dense collection of material. We've got lecture notes, private memoranda, some detailed exegesis.
Right.
The digital files are dated recently, around 2026, but they're clearly referencing a lifetime of work. There are callbacks to lectures from, the 50s, the 60s, the 80s.
It's a whole intellectual ecosystem.
Yeah.
But the premise, the hook that just grabbed me on page 1 and would not let go,
I think I know what you're going to say.
it has to be the assertion that the word religion does not actually appear in the Quran.
There it is. Right.
Let that sink in for a second. We're talking about one of the world's largest religions,
Mhm.
and the source material for this deep dive argues very forcefully that the book it's based on never uses the word religion to describe itself, not once.
It sounds impossible, doesn't it? It sounds like, a clickbait headline or some kind of wild conspiracy theory.
It really does.
But the source documents are incredibly rigorous about this. They go deep into the linguistics and argue that the word we typically translate as religion, the Arabic word mazhab, is just.
Yeah.
It's not there.
So if it's not a religion, what on earth is it?
And that right there is the core conflict of this entire deep dive. It is the central tension. It's the battle between two Arabic words, mazhab versus deen.
Mazhab versus deen.
Yes. The source argues that mazhab, what we call religion, is essentially a human fabrication,
Fabrication.
a watering down. Mazhab is what happens when you take a powerful revolutionary ideology and you strip it of its power. You neuter it. So many of the rituals, you make it a private affair,
Yeah.
my relationship with my God. It's something you do in a temple or a church, maybe on a Friday or a Sunday, to feel good, to save your soul.
Right. And then you go back to your real life on Monday.
Exactly.
Mm.
And your real life is governed by a completely different set of laws. That's the key.
The famous separation of church and state.
Mazhab loves the separation of church and state. It thrives on it. It says, you handle the laws and the economy and the wars. I'll just stay over here in my quiet little spiritual corner. It stays in its lane.
Okay, so that's mazhab. What's deen?
Deen, according to this text, is a system, a code of life. But the most powerful word it uses is a constitution.
A constitution.
Yes, a full-blown constitution. And think about that for a second. Think about the constitution of a country.
Okay.
You don't worship a constitution, do you? You don't light candles in front of it and chant its articles hoping for some kind of personal blessing.
No, of course not. That would be bizarre.
You submit to it. You live within its framework of laws. It governs your economy, your judiciary, your foreign policy, your social interactions. It is, by definition, all-encompassing.
So the argument here is that the Quran was, it was never meant to be a prayer book. It was meant to be the constitution of a state.
Of a specific type of state, yes. A state that operates on a very particular economic and sociological model. The source basically argues that by turning this constitution into a prayer book, humanity has, it has castrated the text.
That's a strong word.
It's the language the source uses. We've turned a manual for social revolution into a collection of, bedtime stories and comforting hymns.
That is incredibly aggressive.
It is. And it gets heavier. Because if you accept this premise, even just for the sake of argument, if deen is a political and social system, then everything changes.
Oh.
God is no longer just a deity up in the sky. He becomes the head of the state, the sovereign, Prayer isn't just a personal ritual, it was more like military training.
And heaven and hell.
They stopped being geographical locations in the afterlife. Hell, in this view, is a sociological disaster zone here on Earth.
Wow. Okay. We have a lot to unpack. I think we need a roadmap here. So we're going to break this down. We'll start with this foundational divide. Deen versus mazhab. Then we're going to get into what the source calls the science of God. And I mean that literally.
Right.
How it uses physics and biology to explain divinity.
Right. Then the law of requital, which is, you could think of it as karma, but on an industrial scale.
Karma on steroids. I like that. And finally, we'll get to the villains of the story. The source identifies what it calls the three enemies of humanity.
And just a quick disclaimer before we properly dive in.
Good idea.
These documents, they represent a very specific, highly intellectual interpretation. It's what you'd call a rationalist reading of the text. We're not here to preach. We're not here to tell you this is the one true Islam.
Absolutely not.
We are here to explore a fascinating and I think incredibly challenging argument that questions the entire status quo of modern religious thought.
So keep that iron box locked tight in the attic. Let's open the file. Section 1, The Great Divide.
Okay, so linguistics first.
Yeah.
The source makes a really big deal about root words.
Right, the three-letter roots in Arabic.
Exactly. It argues that if you don't understand the root, you can't understand the DNA of the concept. It's like trying to understand a tree by only looking at one leaf.
So what's the root for mazhab, for religion?
Well, the source points out that mazhab comes from a root that means a path for passage or a way.
Okay, that sounds pretty neutral.
It is. But over time, especially in Persian and Urdu, it came to mean religion in that very specific Western sense, a set of private beliefs and rituals for personal salvation. My path to God.
Which sounds lovely. It sounds very personal and spiritual.
It does. It sounds completely harmless. And the source argues that's the whole point. It is harmless. But then it contrasts that with the word the Quran actually uses, deen.
And the root for deen is totally different.
Night and day. The root for deen deals with submission, obedience, debt, and governance.
Governance, there's that political word again.
It's unavoidable. The specific phrase used repeatedly in the source is that deen means the law of retribution, or statecraft. So when you accept a deen, you're not just accepting a set of beliefs, you are formally accepting a sovereign authority over your life.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a second.
Please?
Because in the modern world, especially in the West, we think the separation of belief and governance is a good thing, a great thing even.
We call it secularism.
We call it secularism, separation of church and state. It's what stops priests and imams from running the government and telling everyone what to do. So why does this source seem to hate that idea so much?
Because the source argues that secularism is actually a form of polytheism.
Whoa. Okay, that's a leap. Polytheism, as in believing in multiple gods, Zeus and Apollo.
Not in that sense. It's about the concept of shirk.
Shirk, which is usually translated as associating partners with God.
Yeah.
Idolatry.
Right. And usually we think shirk means, bowing down to a golden calf or a statue of a Greek god, while also claiming to believe in Allah. But this source defines God, first and foremost, as the supreme sovereign, the ultimate lawgiver, the head of the state.
Okay, I'm following.
So if you say, okay, I recognize God as the authority in my private spiritual life, so I will fast and pray because he says so.
Right.
But T, I recognize the parliament or the king or the Federal Reserve as the sovereign authority in my public life. So I will structure my economy based on interest, and I'll go to war for reasons of state because they say so. What have you just done?
You've split your loyalty. You have two masters.
You have acknowledged two sovereigns. You've created a dichotomy, a split. In this half of your life, God rules the sacred, but in this other much larger half, man rules the secular.
And the source says that is the ultimate idolatry.
That's what it argues. It says there's no such thing as secular versus sacred. There is only life. And all of life must be governed by one single, consistent, unified law. To split it is to set up a competing God.
So in this interpretation, a secular Muslim is an oxymoron.
According to this text, yes. A complete contradiction in terms. It would be like saying, I'm a loyal citizen of the United States, but I also obey the laws of North Korea on the weekends. The system demands total unified allegiance. Deen is a total system. It covers the boardroom, the bedroom, the courtroom, and the battlefield. There are no exceptions.
This makes the book, the Quran, much, much more than just a spiritual guide.
It reframes it entirely. It turns the Quran into a constitution. And here's where the intellectual heavy lifting really starts. The source introduces a concept, a methodology, called tasrif al-ayat.
Tasrif wulayat. Okay, break that down for us.
It translates roughly to the turning over of verses, or the interconnectedness of verses. It's the core method of interpretation that this source insists on.
What does it mean in practice?
It means the source claims the Quran is a closed system,
A closed system.
meaning it contains its own dictionary. It defines its own terms.
Hold on a second. If I pick up a translation of the Quran right now, it's not organized like a dictionary. It's not even chronological. To be honest, it often feels, well, scattered.
It does. It can feel like a stream of consciousness.
So how can a book that looks like that be a self-explanatory legal code?
That is the million-dollar question. And the source absolutely admits this difficulty. It argues that the book isn't linear, it's holographic.
Holographic, okay.
Meaning, if you want to understand a key concept, let's take salat, which is usually translated as prayer. You can't just look at one verse where it's mentioned. That's not enough. And you definitely, absolutely cannot look at what people were doing in Mecca in the 7th century or what some scholar wrote in a commentary 300 years later.
Why not? I mean, doesn't history provide context? Isn't that essential?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But the source argues that history is exactly where the corruption happened.
The corrupt?
Yes. It argues that over the centuries, kings and priests fabricated traditions, the hadith literature, to justify their own power, their own systems. And they use those man-made traditions as a lens to interpret the Quran.
So instead of the Constitution judging the actions of the king?
The king's hand-picked historians wrote the official interpretation of the Constitution. It's a total inversion of authority.
That's like trying to interpret the U.S. Constitution based solely on tweets from modern politicians.
That is a perfect analogy, exactly. So this Tasrif method says, ignore all of that. Ignore the external history. Ignore the traditions. Look only at the data within the book itself.
How would that work for a word like salat?
You'd find every single instance of the word salat in the entire Quran. Let's say it appears 50 times. You take all 50 of those verses, lay them out side by side, and you search for a single, consistent definition that fits all 50 contexts without contradiction.
You use the book to decode the book.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It is its own cipher key. And the source claims that when you do this, when you meticulously strip away all the external religious baggage, what emerges is not a set of rituals. It's a coherent, logical, socio-political structure.
Okay, so if we follow this logic and we strip away the old man in the sky version of religion, who or what is running this system? Who is God in this framework?
And that takes us right to section 2, God as the engine of evolution.
I feel like we really need to pause here and just reset our mental image of God, because most of us, even if we're not religious, we have this cultural osmosis idea of God, a being, a personality, someone who gets happy when you praise him and gets angry when you sin.
The source wants you to drag that file into the trash can permanently.
And what do we replace it with?
With the concept. The word is Rab.
Rab, which is usually translated as Lord.
Usually, but again, the source goes back to the lexicon, to the root. It argues that Rab means the sustainer of evolution.
Sustainer of evolution. Okay, that sounds like a term from a science fiction novel.
And it's meant to sound scientific. The definition of rububiyat, the process of being a Rab that's given in the text, is the force that nourishes and develops every single entity from its origin point to its final destined completion.
Give me a concrete example of that.
Okay, think of an acorn, a tiny little seed. Inside that seed is the blueprint, the potential to become a massive, towering oak tree.
Right.
But it can't do it on its own. It needs soil, it needs water, it needs sunlight. It needs an entire system, a set of laws and provisions that pushes it from stage A to stage B, then from B to C, all the way to its final form. That entire process, that force, that's rububiyat.
So God isn't a person watching the tree grow from above. God is the process, the force that is driving the growth of the tree.
In this interpretation, yes, absolutely. And it applies to everything. The growth of a galaxy from a nebula, the formation of a star, the development of a fetus in the womb, and, most importantly for us, the evolution of the human self, the human personality.
This is where the source starts quoting Western scientists, right? I remember seeing a reference to a guy named Lloyd Morgan.
Yes, Lloyd Morgan and his theory of emergent evolution.
Okay, so why is an Islamic commentary from the 2020s quoting a British psychologist from the 1920s? What's the connection?
It's because Morgan articulated something that the source sees as being fundamental to the Quran's description of the universe.
Oh.
Morgan argued that evolution isn't just a smooth, gradual slope upwards.
Okay.
He said that sometimes something completely new and unpredictable emerges that couldn't have been forecasted by what came before it. A quantum leap.
Like what? What's an example of that?
The jump from non-life to life. You can have all the chemicals for life swirling around in a primordial suit, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, whatever. But the moment they organize themselves into the first living, self-replicating cell, that is a quantum leap. That is emergence. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
And the source connects this to an attribute of God.
It connects it directly to the attribute Al-Rahman.
Al-Rahman, which we all know from Bismillah, it's usually translated as the most gracious or the beneficent.
The source says, that's too vague, too poetic. Gives a technical definition. It defines Al-Rahman as the provider of gratis resources for emergent evolution.
Gratis resource.
Things you didn't earn. Things that are just given. It's the sudden injection of energy or capability that kickstarts a brand new stage of existence. The universe didn't earn the gift of life. It was an emergent property, a gift. Early humans didn't earn the gift of consciousness or revelation. It was a sudden evolutionary leap. That's Rahman.
So Rahman is the spark that starts the new, bigger engine.
Exactly. And its partner attribute, Al-Rahim, is the fuel that keeps the engine running smoothly after it starts.
Al-Rahim, the merciful.
The source defines Rahim as the law of returns. It's the mechanism where if you put in the work, you get a result. It's the gradual, linear, predictable evolution. So Rahman gives you the seed and the soil for free. But if you water that seed and tend to it, Rahim is the law that ensures your effort makes it grow. One is a gift, the other is a wage.
This is incredibly mechanical. It's stripping away all the personality and turning theology into physics.
That is precisely the goal. The source repeatedly calls this irrational sociology. It even redefines the concept of God's kingship, the attribute Malik.
Malik.
Right, but not a tyrant sitting on a golden throne. The source points out that the root of the word Malik is related to the substance that holds bricks together in a wall. Mortar. Cement.
God's cement.
God is the cementing force of the universe.
What does that even mean?
It's a physics concept. The source actually cites Sir James Jeans, the British physicist, and his idea about the interconnectedness of all matter. You know, if you move your finger, you disturb the stars.
Right.
The universe has a natural tendency towards chaos, entropy. It wants to fly apart. What holds the atom together? What holds the solar system in its orbit? What holds a society together and stops it from descending into anarchy?
Gravity, the strong nuclear force, social laws.
And in this model, all of those are manifestations of one single cementing force, a central unifying authority. The source argues God is the centripetal force that prevents humanity from scattering into chaos. Shirk idolatry, splitting your loyalties, is centrifugal. It pulls things apart. Tawhid, oneness, unity is centripetal. It pulls everything toward a single center.
Okay, I think I'm with you on the physics of it. It's a metaphor, a model. But religion is usually about morality, good and evil, punishment and reward. If God is just a force of gravity or a law of evolution, how does he judge us? Where does justice come in?
And that leads us straight into section 3, the law of requital.
This is the part of the text that really, really challenged me, because we are so conditioned to think of Judgment Day as this epic courtroom drama.
Right. You die, you stand before a throne, a big book is opened.
A list of your good deeds and bad deeds is read out, you beg for mercy, and the judge decides whether to send you up or down.
And the source just says, that is a childish fantasy, a metaphor for people who can't grasp the mechanics of reality.
So what's the reality, according to this source?
The reality is Makafati Amal, the law of requital. It's pure, simple, inescapable cause and effect.
Okay, but how is that different from, say, karma?
It's very, very similar, but it's framed in a more biological or psychological way. The source argues that every single action you take, every thought you have, leaves a physical or metaphysical imprint on yourself, on your personality. The Quranic term is your kuti.
So it's not being written down in a book by an angel somewhere?
No, it's being recorded in you, in the very structure of your being.
Like a scar on your skin, or a muscle that grows from exercise.
That's a perfect analogy. Exactly. If you consistently exercise, your muscle grows stronger. That's a positive result recorded in your own body. If you consistently drink poison, your liver fails. The liver isn't judging you. The liver doesn't hate you. But the inviolable law of biology dictates that poison causes cellular damage.
So the source is saying that God's wrath is just, the natural consequences of breaking the law.
Precisely. The term gadab, or wrath, is completely redefined. It's not emotional anger. It's described as the grip of the law. The source uses the analogy of fire. If a law of nature is fire burns, and a child puts their hand in a fire, they get burned.
Is the fire angry at the child?
No, of course not. But the nature of fire is to burn. That is its law. That inescapable consequence is the wrath. If a society builds an economy based on exploitation and greed, it will eventually collapse into revolution and chaos. That collapse isn't God striking them down with lightning bolts from heaven. It's the inevitable mechanical result of the seeds they planted.
But wait a minute, this completely removes the personal aspect of forgiveness. If I mess up, I can't just say, I'm sorry, God, and have the sin wiped away.
No, you can't. The source is very blunt about this. If you stick your hand in the fire and then say, I'm sorry to the fire, does the burn magically heal itself instantly?
No, the damage is done.
The damage is done. So the source defines forgiveness. The Arabic word is maghfirah, not as wiping the slate clean, but as providing a mechanism for repair and protection.
Like having an immune system.
Yes, that's a brilliant way to put it. God has, within the system, provided the laws of medicine to help you heal the burn. If you apply the correct ointment, which is the analogy for doing a good deed to counteract the bad one, the wound will begin to heal. You are protected from the fatal consequence, like infection. But the scar might remain. It's a mechanical process of damage control and repair, not a judicial pardon from a king.
This has to lead to a very, very radical reinterpretation of heaven and hell.
Radical is an understatement. It dismantles the entire popular conception.
I mean, for billions of people around the world, these are real places, geographic locations with specific features.
The source argues they are not places, but evolutionary states.
Unpack that. What is an evolutionary state?
Okay, so we talked about the goal of life. In this system, the goal is not salvation.
Right, because salvation implies being saved from something, like you're drowning and need a life raft.
Exactly. The source argues the goal is falah, and falah means achievement, success, growth, cultivation. The human self, or personality, is like a seed that is meant to be cultivated and developed into something so strong, so coherent, that it's capable of surviving the death of the physical body.
So you're basically building a soul that is strong enough to survive the transition to the next phase of existence.
You're evolving to the next stage of life. Jannah, what we call heaven, is described as a state or a society or an environment where this growth, this falah, continues unhindered. It's a society of universal nourishment where every self can reach its maximum potential, continuous development.
Then hell.
Jayim. The source defines it as stagnation, arrested development, obstruction.
I have to pause you there. Arrested development. That sounds like a sitcom title, not eternal damnation. If you strip away the fire and the brimstone and the torture, doesn't that let bad people off the hook? If I'm a ruthless tyrant and my punishment is just I stop growing, why would I care? I'm rich, I'm powerful right now. Who cares if my soul stagnates?
That's because you're still thinking of the self as some kind of vague, ethereal ghost in the machine. The source argues the self is a tangible reality, even if we can't measure it with our current instruments. Think of it this way. Imagine a fetus in the womb.
Okay.
Its entire job in that 9-month period is to grow lungs, eyes, limbs, to prepare for the next world, which is outside the womb.
Right.
Now, what if that fetus could think and it decided, you know what, I don't need lungs. I'm perfectly happy here, breathing fluid. Lungs are useless to me. What happens the moment birth comes?
It dies. Or it suffocates, it can't breathe.
It enters a new environment for which it is completely unequipped. That suffocation, that agonizing realization of its own incapacity, that sharp burning pain of a self that cannot breathe in the new world, that, the source argues, is the fire of hell. It is the burning regret and pain of a self that realizes it has failed to evolve and has become an evolutionary dead end.
So it's not a punishment that's inflicted on you by an external force. It's the intrinsic natural consequence of your own failure to develop.
It is biological or spiritual extinction. The source frames it as the survival of the fittest, but in a spiritual or psychological sense. The righteous are the fit. Their cells are developed, strong, and coherent so they survive and advance. The wicked are the unfit. Their cells are shriveled, weak, and underdeveloped. They stagnate and suffer the consequences of that state.
That is, that's actually more terrifying than the cartoon version with pitchforks.
It raises the stakes, doesn't it? You're not just following rules to please a master anymore. You're following a biological and psychological regimen to ensure your own survival and evolution.
It does. But it also raises a huge question. If this is the truth of the book, this grand system of social and personal evolution, why have most of us never heard this before? Why is Islam in the popular imagination known for rituals, beards, and headscarves, not for emergent evolution and sociology?
Because according to the source, the entire system was deliberately hijacked and suppressed. And this brings us to Section 4, The sociology of suppression.
The three enemies.
The triad of power. The source argues that throughout all of human history, whenever a prophet came with this deen, this system of liberation and universal justice, it immediately threatened the people in power.
And who are those people, specifically?
It's always three groups working in tandem. First, you have the rulers. The kings, the pharaohs, the modern dictators. They control the bodies of men through force. They hate deen because deen's first principle is no obedience to any human being over the law of God.
Okay, that one's obvious. They don't want to give up power. Who's second?
The capitalists. The source uses the Quranic term mutrafin, which means the wealthy elite who live in decadent luxury while others starve. They control the resources, the means of production. They hate deen because deen demands an economic system where surplus wealth is constantly circulated back into the community, not hoarded. It threatens their hoard.
Rulers and the rich. A classic combo. Who's the third?
The priesthood. And here the source pulls no punches whatsoever. It calls the religious class, the mullahs, the priests, the Pharisees, it calls them the most dangerous and pernicious of all three groups.
More dangerous than the king with the army, or the billionaire with the money. Why?
Because the priest doesn't control your body or your wallet. He controls your mind. The priest has the anesthesia.
The anesthesia.
Think about it. If the king is taxing you to death, you might eventually rebel. If the capitalist is starving your children, you might eventually riot. But if the priest comes along and tells you your poverty is a sacred test from God, be patient. Suffer quietly. If you accept your misery in this short life, you will get a palace filled with riches in the afterlife. What happens to your revolutionary spirit?
It dissolves. You accept the suffering because you've been convinced it's holy.
Precisely. The source argues that mazhab religion is the greatest tool the ruling class has ever invented to paralyze the working class. It takes concrete political oppression and reframes it as an abstract spiritual test. And that's why the source argues the priesthood is actually more dangerous than the king. The king only kills your body. The priest kills your will to fight back.
This sounds very, very Marxist. I mean, religion is the opium of the masses. It's almost a direct quote.
The source actually acknowledges this. It says Marx was 100% right about religion, but it argues he was 100% wrong about deen. Religion is the opium, but deen is the antidote to the opium. Deen is the revolution that breaks the opium habit and smashes the power of the dealers.
The source uses some really powerful examples to back this up. It brings up Jesus.
It does. It focuses heavily on the conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees. It argues that the priests didn't hate Jesus because of his theology. They couldn't care less about his specific interpretation of the Torah.
They cared about their jobs, their income.
Exactly. There's a fascinating note here that references the Gospel of Barnabas, and look, that's a controversial text, but the source uses it to illustrate a sociological point. The priests are depicted whispering to the high priest, saying, if this man succeeds in establishing the kingdom of God, the people will follow him, and we will have to go out and work for a living.
We will have to work for a living. That's the real fear.
It's an economic racket, selling holiness, selling forgiveness, selling tickets to heaven. If the people realize they have a direct, unmediated connection to the system of God, the middleman is out of a job.
And there's that other example with Moses. The source mentions a very strange story about Moses bathing.
Yes. This is a classic example of what the source critiques about the traditional religious mindset. There's a story found in the Hadith collection of Bukhari that Moses was very shy and always bathed alone. One day, he put his clothes on a rock to go bathe, and the rock suddenly came to life and ran away with his clothes.
The rock ran away.
It ran away. And so Moses, according to this story, had to chase the rock completely naked, shouting, "My clothes, O stone, and my clothes, O stone," until the other Israelites saw him naked and realized he didn't have a physical defect he was hiding.
I mean, why? Why is that story even a thing? What's the point?
That is exactly the question the source asks. It says, why, out of all the monumental, heroic struggles of Moses against the superpower of Egypt, the liberation of an entire people from slavery, why is this the story that gets preserved and cherished in religious books?
To distract from the real message.
To trivialize, to turn a revolutionary leader who took on an empire into a silly cartoon character. Religion, the source says, obsesses over the trivialities, the length of Moses' beard, his bathing habits, magical rocks. Dean focuses on the monumental, how he dismantled the slavery-based economic system of Pharaoh. The source argues this is a deliberate strategy by the priesthood. keep the masses focused on the trivial so they never ever think about the revolutionary.
It's a tabloidization of
Yeah,
scripture.
that's the perfect term for it.
Okay, so if the priesthood has twisted all these core concepts to keep us docile, then we have to go back and redefine the central act of a Muslim's life, the concept of ibadah.
And that's section 5, ibadah.
Anyone who's been around Islam knows this word. It's always translated as worship. Prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, chanting.
And the source says, incorrect. That is a mistranslation that served the priestly agenda.
Oh,
The root word is abdi, and ab does not mean worshiper. It means slave or subject of a state. To be an abdi is to be in a state of total submission and obedience.
submission to what?
To the law, to the Constitution.
Slave to the law. You know, to our modern liberal ears, it sounds Orwellian. It sounds oppressive.
It sounds incredibly harsh. But the source completely flips the paradox on its head. It argues, you are only truly free when you are a slave to the law of God.
How does being a slave make you free? That's a contradiction.
Because if you bow to an abstract, permanent, unchangeable law, a divine constitution that applies to everyone equally, from the ruler to the pauper, then you never ever have to bow to another human being.
Ah, I see.
You don't have to bow to the king. You don't have to bow to the priest. You don't have to bow to your boss. You don't have to bow to the wealthy landowner. Deen eliminates all forms of human tyranny by replacing human sovereignty with divine law. The central declaration in the Fatiha, Iyaka na'budu, thee alone we serve, is interpreted not as a plea of worship, but as a political declaration of independence from all human authority. It means, I serve no man.
That is a profoundly political reading. It turns a line from a prayer into a revolutionary slogan.
And regarding the rituals themselves, the salah, prayer, the sung fasting, the source uses what it calls the soldier analogy to explain their purpose.
I have to say I liked this one. This analogy made it all click for me.
It's very effective. Imagine a soldier in a highly disciplined army. He wakes up at 0500. He polishes his boots until he can see his face in them. He makes his bed with perfect hospital corners. He marches in formation, left, right, left, right. He drills with his rifle for hours.
Okay, a life of discipline.
But is the purpose of the army to have soldiers with shiny boots? Is the ultimate victory of the army simply that they marched in a perfectly straight line?
No, of course not. That's all just training. The purpose is to fight and win battles, to defend the nation.
Exactly. The drills, the rituals, are the means to an end. The end is victory in battle. The drills build discipline, cohesion, obedience to a central command, readiness. But here's the kicker. If a soldier performs all the drills perfectly, he has the shiniest boots and the straightest marching line in the whole army. But when the enemy invades, he runs away or refuses to fight. Has he done his duty?
No, he's a traitor. Or at the very least, he's completely useless.
The source argues that the religious world today is full of soldiers who have become masters of the drill but have completely abandoned the battlefield.
Whoa, that's a heavy charge.
It says that many modern religious people are like retired soldiers who still put on their old uniforms and march up and down their driveways with broomsticks. They are perfectly mimicking the form, the prayers, the fasting, the rituals, but they have completely lost the function and the authority. The battle, which the source defines as the establishment of a just social order, the eradication of poverty, the crushing of tyranny, that battle has been completely abandoned. They are drilling for a war they have no intention of ever fighting.
That is a haunting image. An army of sleepwalkers just marching in perfect circles.
It suggests that ibadah isn't the ritual itself. The ritual is just the training. True ibadah is the execution of the law in the battlefield of society. If you pray 5 times a day but you cheat your customers in business, you haven't done ibadah. If you fast for a month but you ignore the starving family down the street, you haven't done ibadah, you've just polished your boots.
This has to move us into the final section. Because if ibadah is about building an entire society, you can't do that alone in your bedroom. It requires collective action.
And that's section 6, the state and the future.
The source uses a specific term here that kept coming up, temkin ad-din.
It means the establishment of the system, or the empowerment of the deen. The core argument is that you cannot practice deen in a vacuum. You cannot have a constitution without a state. You need territory, you need sovereignty, you need the power to implement the laws.
And this gives us a massive clue about the context of the person or group who wrote these documents, because there is a very specific and somewhat lamenting mention of the country of Pakistan.
Yes. The source views the creation of Pakistan in 1947 not just as a random political event, but as a theological necessity that went wrong.
Explain what that means, a theological necessity.
The argument goes like this. You can pray anywhere. You can pray in India, in London, in New York. If Islam was just a religion, just a mazhab of private rituals, you would never need to create a separate country for it.
Right.
But if Islam is a deen, a comprehensive system of government and economics that is different from both capitalism and communism, then you need a laboratory.
A laboratory. I like that.
You need a plot of land, a sovereign territory, where you are free to implement this constitution of God and demonstrate to the world that it works. The source argues that Pakistan was meant to be that laboratory, a state that was neither a theocracy ruled by a corrupt priesthood, nor a secular state where God is exiles from public life. It was meant to be something new.
But the source seems to think that experiment failed spectacularly.
It argues it was hijacked almost immediately. And by whom? By the very group the system was designed to neutralize, the priesthood. The source claims they took over and turned the potential laboratory of deen into just another fortress of religion.
So, if we look out at the world today, at the Muslim world, or at any society for that matter, how do we know if they are succeeding or failing? If we can't count the number of mosques or the number of pilgrims as a metric of success, what are the metrics?
The source is brutally, almost coldly empirical on this point. It lists the indicators of divine blessing or success.
What are they?
They're all concrete and worldly. Is the society free from external slavery and foreign debt? Does it have economic dominance and provide for the basic needs of all its citizens? Is it a leader in science and technology? Is it contributing to the nourishment and security of all humanity, not just its own people?
So, things like GDP, literacy rates, scientific patents, human rights records, military strength.
Yes. Hard, measurable, real-world metrics. The source argues that if the society is poor, if it's dependent on foreign aid, if it's scientifically backward, if its people are humiliated on the world stage, then that society is under divine wrath.
Ouch. That is incredibly harsh. Even if the people in that society are praying 5 times a day and fasting perfectly.
Especially if they're praying 5 times a day, because it proves that their prayers are just empty drills.
Yeah.
They're polishing their boots while their house is on fire. The source argues you cannot bribe the laws of nature, which are God's laws. You can't pray for bountiful harvest if you never planted any seeds. You can't pray for economic power if your entire system is built on corruption and incompetence. The wrath is just the natural mechanical consequence of that incompetence.
You know, that flips the usual script completely on its head.
Yeah.
Usually you hear religious people look at the West and say, they may be wealthy and powerful, but they are spiritually bankrupt. This source seems to imply that their wealth and order is a sign that they are, perhaps unknowingly, following some of God's laws correctly.
To a certain extent, yes. The source notes that the laws of nature, the laws of physics, economics, sociology, organization, are also God's laws. If an atheist society follows those laws of cause and effect, they will get the corresponding results of success and prosperity. If a society that calls itself believing ignores them, they will get the results of failure and poverty. The label Muslim is not a magic shield that saves you from the machinery of the universe.
So where does that leave us? What is the final argument of this entire stack of papers? What's the end game?
The final argument is, it's incredibly empowering, but it's also really daunting. It claims that humanity as a species has matured.
Matured?
Yes. It argues that the era of prophethood is over.
Okay, that's a standard Islamic belief, that Muhammad was the final prophet.
It is. But the interpretation of what that means is radically different here. Usually people think prophethood ended, and now we just have to look backwards in nostalgia and try to copy what they did. This source argues prophethood ended because we graduated.
Like finishing school and the teacher leaves the classroom?
Exactly. We've grown up. We don't need a teacher or a divine nanny to hold our hand and give us personal guidance anymore. We have been given the final complete book, the Constitution. We've been given the intellect to understand and apply it. And we've been given the concept of the state as the tool to implement it.
So, we're on our own now.
We are autonomous. The source calls this the transition from the era of miracles and prophets to the era of the state and the intellect. It's a profound call to grow up, to stop waiting for a savior, to stop waiting for a Mahdi or a Messiah to descend from the clouds and fix the world with a magic wand. The blueprint is there. Build the house yourself.
This has been wow. My brain feels like it just did a 90-minute P90X workout.
It's a lot to process. It's a complete inversion of the standard narrative we're all used to.
So let's just try to summarize this radical reconfiguration one last time, just the bullet points.
Okay, let's try. 1. Deen versus mazhab. Islam isn't a religion of private rituals. It's a socio-political system, a deen, meant to govern a just state.
2.
2, God is not a moody king in the sky, but the sustaining force of evolution, the Rab.
3.
3, the Quran is not a hymnal, but a self-explaining constitution that requires no external historical traditions to be understood.
4.
4, judgment isn't a future courtroom drama, but a present and immediate law of cause and effect, the law of requital.
5.
5, heaven and hell are not physical places, but evolutionary states of continuous growth versus terminal stagnation.
And 6.
6, ibadah is not worship, but total submission to the divine law and active duty in the social army that establishes it.
And the so what of all of this seems pretty massive. It challenges everyone, whether you're religious or not, to look at these ancient texts in a completely different way. Not as mystical mumbo-jumbo, but as potential manuals for governance, for sociology, for self-development.
It demands active participation in society. It argues you can't just be a good person or spiritual in your living room while the world outside burns. You have to be part of building a system that ensures everyone eats, everyone grows, and everyone is free from human tyranny.
I have a final thought on this, and it's something the source touched on briefly, but I can't stop thinking about it.
Go for it.
The source says that human history is a linear journey. It's supposed to be about forward evolution,
Right.
but it also defines hell, Jahim, as stagnation, as arrested development.
Okay, yeah.
So if we look at the world today, the wars, the grotesque inequality, the obsession with trivial identity politics, the rise of ritualism over justice everywhere, and we consider the source's argument that religion is a tool designed to keep us stagnant.
And I see where you're going with this.
Are we actively devolving? Has we stalled the engine of human progress?
That's the terrifying question that hangs over the entire text, isn't it?
And if hell isn't a pit of fire you fall into after you die, but a state of obstructed development that you experience right here on Earth, are many of our modern, deeply religious societies actually living in hell right now, all while thinking they're on the fast track to heaven?
If you look at the poverty, the dependency, the injustice, the intellectual stagnation, and the lack of freedom in so many of those societies, and you apply the source's own definitions, the conclusion is almost inescapable.
Yeah.
They might be waiting for a heaven in the future while actively creating a hell in the present.
On that rather cheery note, this has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
Keep thinking.